Let's turn the sound off on my
Hi,
phone.
it's Martin here from Steffi Ball Promotions TV. Every single week, we always try and get a guest that's got some kind of reconciliation with boxing, whether it be a fighter, whether it be a manager, whether it be a trainer. Today, we've managed to get a guest that that basically is the voice and face of boxing, the legend Andy Clarke. So, Andy, thank you very much for giving us some of your time.
No problem. That was a great intro. I enjoyed that.
I'm trying. Andy, yeah. So it's brilliant to get you on, buddy. And all it is, just want to have a chat with you about boxing, because you've got some memories that people would love nothing more. You've got the memories of AJ Ruiz 1, AJ Ruiz 2. You've got the memories of AJ Klitschko. You've got Bellew. The list is endless. But just to start us off, how did you first get into, probably not so much boxing, but how did you get into the media side of the sports?
So I didn't have any real long-term plan with it, as in I didn't pick it out as something I was going to do from a young age, which a lot of people who end up doing this did do. I was fairly laissez-faire when it came to a career plan, and that was fine. Like 20 years ago when I entered the workforce, you didn't need to have some kind of detailed life plan. Things were easier then than they are now. I think it's very difficult for people leaving university now for all sorts of reasons. I think it already was, but even more so now with the pandemic, obviously. So I went to university and did my degree. Did that in classics, which is Latin and ancient Greek, and history and philosophy around that. And I did that because I really enjoyed it, not because I thought I'll do this and then after that the obvious thing is to do this job, because it's not really one of those degrees. So I finished doing that, and I just kind of took a little bit of time out, took a temping job, I had to think about what I wanted to do, and I thought, why not try and do this? People do it. It seemed like a bit of a pipe dream, but people do it. No one I knew did it, which was, it helps if you've got a kind of contact inside the industry. But I wrote a lot of letters, made a lot of telephone calls. Most people got back to me. I think that's pretty standard. People are encouraging when you're trying to get your foot in the door, because they've generally been there themselves. And I got an offer from TalkSport, who just relaunched from Talk Radio to TalkSport. This is early 2000. I got an offer to go in there on expenses to start with, and just see how I did. And you start off as a runner, doing the photocopying. I don't know if anybody does photocopying anymore, but that kind of thing, making the tea, all of that, just a general kind of gopher. And that's how everybody starts. And I loved it, and it went from there. I was obsessed with sport, have been in my whole life. So there was already that kind of familiarity there, and then it was a case of just trying to learn how to do the job, learn about the business. And it was a great place to be, because it was a bit of a pirate ship. You know, it was we kind of did our own thing and bent the rules as much as we could, and the people in charge, that was how they really did things, and it was a lot of fun. And there weren't that many people there, so you got to do things quickly. So after 6 months, I was out going to football matches and stuff like that, and I got to see loads of great stuff there. And that's where it all started. And then I stayed there for a good while, and then gradually kind of moved into TV. But it was a traditional route that when I started, the way in was to go through radio stations, and it was very doable then because there were loads of them. So when I'm not from London, but I moved to London, and then I wrote my letters and made my calls when I was in London. And there was Capital, they did loads of sport at that point. It was massive, Capital Gold Sport. Talk Sport, like I said, just started. There's 5 Live was down there at the time, although I was unlikely to get any foot in the door at 5 Live. You needed some experience, really, and I didn't have any. There was BBC London, but they got back to me. They got in touch. BBC Essex, there were IRN, Independent Radio News, that was going then. They used to send people to everything then. They don't really, well, they do exist now, but it's much, much smaller. So one of those places would give you would invite you in at the very least. So it was kind of, it wasn't easy necessarily, but it's harder now. And I think it's definitely harder now to get that kind of to get into a station and into an office where you're there every day and learning off other people, which was definitely, that was absolutely key, and it is a harder thing to do now.
No, I totally agree. I find, I mean, when I was a kid, talking now as if I'm not really old, but when I was a kid, I was always told, because I always wanted to be a football commentator, always wanted to be, and they always says go through your, mine was BBC WM, BBC West Midlands, but I think nowadays, like you said, it's a lot harder, because if you look at commentary, apart from yourself, it's normally ex-fighters or ex-footballers, or it's very rare you'll see someone come through the platform who's just been just somebody who's just tried their luck, good at the commentary side, and then they've gone to that next step. Do you not agree?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the sport, really, because with football, for example, you'll always have a broadcaster and an ex-pro next to them. So Martin Tyler and Gary Neville. And so the lead commentator is still always a journalist, a broadcast journalist. And in boxing, that's still the same too. So at Sky, it's me or Adam Smith, John Rawling at BT, Dave Farrer, Channel 5, and they'll have an ex-pro next to them. So there is still definitely that role there for us non-former pros. In other sports, it's changed a bit. In cricket, for example, pretty much everybody on that Sky team, they're all former players. And that's worked because they're more than capable of carrying that coverage. Rugby, the former players seem to, I don't think any of them has become a lead commentator, but again, they maybe have engaged with it just a bit more, or maybe they've just been a little bit more confident about the kinds of things that they want to do and have really wanted to get more and more involved in it. But there is still that role there for the lead commentator to be a journalist. That's still pretty much how it works. But like I say, boxing, there aren't that many of us. There's a lot more scope for work in football. More difficult to stand out. And you need some kind of all-round skills, really. No one's going to put you straight on there being a commentator. So I reported on football for like 7 or 8 years at TalkSport before I got near any commentary. And you just get used to doing stuff live. You just get used to doing other things, interviewing or whatever it might be. And it's just about building up that kind of portfolio. It builds up your confidence because that comes with experience. Everyone's nervous to start with. There's no, you meet people who claim that they don't suffer from nerves and never have, but it's not true. I don't know why they say it, because they're not fooling anyone. Anyone who's ever done anything knows that you get nervous sometimes doing things for the first time. So yeah, I mean, it's not, it is a difficult thing to break into, but what a lot of people, some people find is that they go into it thinking they want to do one thing. So I went into it when I was a runner. I thought I definitely want to be on air and be a reporter, commentator, maybe presenter, who knows. But I had friends who thought the same, and then when they got into it, they decided they preferred the production side of it. There's lots of different roles, and they all kind of feed into each other and inform each other. You just need to try and get in first, and then you can kind of make up your own mind. It's a fairly precarious job. I mean, I've been freelance my whole career for 20 years, and I'm so used to it, I don't even think about it. But the idea of that would fill some people with dread, because there's not a lot of security attached to it. But that's just how it is, really.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Would you say it'd be like, with regards to the pandemic that we're in now? I bet that would have been a lot harder if you wasn't like associated with Sky Sports or DAZN.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've got a lot of friends who have really suffered through the pandemic. I mean, they were making good money, so they had some reserves, but at the same time, some of them have really done very little work now for almost a year, with absolutely no help from the government. And that's really, hard. I mean, not just financially, but also because I think mentally you would just feel like you've been completely discarded. And I know plenty of people that's happened to. I'm not on staff at Sky, but what they did do for the first lockdown, which was really, really good, was they paid me for that first lockdown. So for that first 4.5 months from mid-March to the end of July, just working it out based on what I made the year before and whatever, without going into too many details. So that was a massive weight off my mind, because if that hadn't happened, I'd be I wouldn't be that far away from running out of money now. Like, I'd probably have a couple more. I mean, work's back, but nothing like the same degree.
That's a great.
The last 6 months have been tricky because there's probably about 50% the amount of work there was before, and you've got to make allowances on your fees and stuff like that because people are looking after budgets. So yeah, it's, you don't really want to complain too much. I don't anyway, because I know people who've got it a lot worse, but at the same time, it's your own world, isn't it? It's everybody's going to think mostly about what they're doing, and taking the big picture and looking at, having, perspective is good, but at the same time, you're always going to think about what you're doing yourself, and it has been very frustrating at times. But we're all in the same. Not everybody's in the same situation, because obviously, if you're self-employed, then it is different. But everyone's struggling. Everyone's struggling, and I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound too kind of merciless, but to be honest, I've had spells during my career where things haven't gone my way, whilst everyone else seemed to have been doing great, and that's pretty dispiriting. Whereas with this, everyone's
we're all in the same boat, aren't we? We're all
suffering, so that kind of makes it easier, I think, in a weird sort of way.
No, definitely. That leads me on to my next thing. Like, during these past couple of lockdowns, the one thing that I cannot stop listening to is your podcast with Matthew Macklin. Now that's been, because there's probably a lot of people that go out there to exercise, because that's all we can do is go running, a little bit of exercise, and it's always, let's put a podcast on. How did that idea ever come about with you and Matt? Because it's bringing the whole boxing world together and getting us to listen to people, like when you have conversations with Dave Caldwell, with Steffi Ball, with Bruce Buffer, Michael Buffer, sorry. It's refreshing, because them are the conversations that boxing fans love to listen to.
So it was Matt's idea. So we've been working together a lot for the last 4 or 5 years, but before that, probably the first thing we did together was about 2013, and we've always got on well. And he said it to me at the start of sort of late 2018. Said, how about doing a podcast? There were plenty of them around at that point. I wasn't really into them at that stage. I hadn't really kind of got into it, and then I did, and then I got heavily into it. And it's like you say, you go out for a run or a walk, or on the tube, or in your car, or whatever, and it's just a great way to pass the time. So I fancied it straight away, and we just kind of we've done it all ourselves, really. We haven't looked for a sponsor at any point. We probably will at some point, but now's not exactly the best time to be doing that anyway. And it's a lot of fun, you're kind of learning how to do it. My tech skills aren't that bad, because in terms of how you record it, because when I was working for radio, you had to know about that stuff, and although it's changed quite a bit, some things haven't. We've got a mate of ours called Darren Reese, who does all our promos and does things with the audio. He's basically our producer. He's really, really good. He's the same as us. He's doing it because he enjoys it, and no one's making any money off this. It's just we just do it for the fun of it, and it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. The way we used to record it was we would do 2 or 3 per fight week. We just go to a fight week, a Sky Fight Week, see who was around, and think about what we could talk to different people about. So it's very much sort of themes and topics rather than news and reviews, although we'll be weeks, we'll have big fight weeks where we'll have a proper preview and a look back. And we've been Zooming it for the last, not far off a year now, because that's really been the only way to do it. But that's opened up different avenues too, because you can get hold of people who you wouldn't be able to normally from overseas. Yeah, and it's kind of it did help a lot during that long stretch where there was no work to do. It just made me feel anyway like I was still involved, like I was still working, and we
Keeps
got fans
with the boxers as well, doesn't it? It keeps the relationship with the boxers and the trainers still ticking.
Yeah, and people didn't really have anything to do, did they? During that one last year particularly, but also at the minute, people are at a loose end and they're they're kind of glad of something to do. They're glad to come on. They like having a chat. We always try and make it a bit different. We're doing one with Glenn Catley later today, which is going to be about, because Glenn's now a qualified psychotherapist as well as hypnotherapist, I think. And obviously he was a former world champion. And we're talking to him about nerves and fear and how you get over it and how you harness it and what techniques people use to negotiate it and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what we always look to try and do, is pick out kind of themes. And it's great fun talking to people in boxing. You know yourself, there's loads of good stories. People are great at telling them, and you get some genuinely funny stuff that comes out without searching, without trying too hard to get it. It just kind of happens. There's nothing more excruciating than listening to kind of enforced, contrived banter. That can be quite hard work, but it's easy, to be honest. With boxing's just an amazing sport for that. There's a reason why there've been so many films and books and stuff like that, and there's been such an allure about it still, and I think always will be, because it's the people involved in it. It's I covered football for a long time and I loved it, and I'm not saying the people in it are dull, because they're not, but it's just that there is such a barrier built up around them by PR and football clubs and all the rest of it, that they would really prefer it if they never said anything. The people around them would prefer it if they never said anything, and they never did an interview ever, and that's why you don't really ever get anything of any particular interest. Whereas with boxing, people, they have to sell themselves, don't they? And that's really important. And they just don't really care that much about their. When I say they don't care about their image, what they are, who they are, and they're happy with who they are, and they just want to come across as being authentic and themselves. So they're not trying to be anybody else. They're not trying to put up this kind of image of, oh, I should say this or I should say that. Right at the top end of the sport, it happens a bit. Anthony Joshua's had to play that game to a degree. People criticise him for that, but I don't think he can really, because when you're as big as him, you've got to maybe send things through a few more channels. But generally, they are just themselves, and they say what they say, and they don't particularly care what people think about it, or if somebody wants to have a discussion about it, they're happy to have it.
Well, the thing is, they're fighters, and a boxer's a fighter, and if a boxer's got a chance to have an interview, and if a boxer wants to get to a certain level, then, or they want a certain belt, that means they have to beat that opponent in a fight. So it gives the boxer an opportunity to not so much call out a fighter, but sell a fight or sell themselves, so the public can say, that's a great fight, that is. And then all of a sudden the promoters will start listening to that interview and they'll start weighing it up and think, this could actually be a good fight. Whereas footballers can't really do that, can they?
No, and they don't need to either. It's like any team sport, any team sport, any of them really. It's not part of the remit or job description for the participants to sell tickets. That they don't have to do that. It's whereas with boxers, they've got to publicise themselves. They've got to convince, like you say, a promoter that this is a big fight. The promoter then tries to convince TV that it's a good fight. People aren't selling tickets at the minute, but they will be again soon, and it'll probably be more important than it's ever been, particularly for small hall promoters, that their first few shows go well and that they don't lose money, and that hopefully they make a bit, because everybody's, suffering financially through this. And they need to do what they need to do to create that interest. So I never really mind what fighters say in the build up to fights. Sometimes they'll get a bit of criticism if they say this or they say that or come across a certain way, but they can say what they want, because at the end of it all, they're going to have to back it up. The bigger the talk, kind of like the braver it is, almost, because you're setting yourself up to look like a fool if you fall short of it. That's what I find so admirable about all of them, is that there is no greater way to put yourself out there than boxing. There's no more brutal way to lose than in boxing. And when I say brutal, I don't mean the physical punishment. I mean just the dynamic of it. It's one-on-one. You've lost. You may have said a few things in the build-up. Everybody's seen it if it's on TV. Even if it's not, all your friends and family know about it. You're putting yourself out there in a way that is just unthinkable to most of us. And that's why, everybody's got to try and support them as much as they can, because it's something that just, quite honestly, most people would never even entertain the idea of doing it.
And I think that's why you have to respect Anthony Joshua, because when he lost against Andy Ruiz, there was so many things that he could have said that probably would have tarnished his career moving forward, but it would have probably saved face that night. But he lost to Ruiz and he just said, the better man won. And to this day, there's no excuses that have come out of his mouth to why he lost that fight.
No, and that's I've always got a lot of admiration for that too, because I do understand it when fighters come out with excuses. Everybody remembers David Haye getting ridiculed after that fight against Klitschko because he took off his boot and showed everybody his little toe. But I understand why he did it, because it was the biggest night of his career. It didn't go his way. People were thinking he could have done more. There was a reason in his head as to why, something that certainly didn't help, and it wouldn't have helped. And he just couldn't stop himself. He just couldn't help himself from telling people, because he was down, he was disappointed. But it never looks good, does it? Even if it's a really convincing reason, it never looks good. And as difficult as it must be, the best route is just to suck it up. And there were all those conspiracy theories with Joshua about anxiety attacks and all sorts, and being knocked out in sparring, and everybody saying, oh, he doesn't look right on the way to the ring, and all the rest of it. And it doesn't mean anything. There's only a few people who really know what actually happened. And the best way to get past it and get over it is just to take it. It's just to absorb it. You look at Wilder, and that defeat against Fury would have been incredibly hard to take. But he just went to a different level with the reasons that he came out with, and he's made a fool of himself. It's as simple as that. And I'm an admirer of his. I think he's great for the sport. I think he's really good for boxing. But the litany of reasons that he came out with, which just didn't make any sense, it's not done him any favors. It's really damaged his credibility.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say there, because Wilder is, up until his last two fights, he was unstoppable. And since he's lost to Tyson Fury and he's come out with these excuses, you can say, there's been absolutely no press or there's no coverage about Wilder at all. Like, he was a former world WBC champion, heavyweight champion of the world. There's been nothing said. And he probably, if he'd gone and said, right, Tyson, yeah, you won that fight, you beat me, you was the better man, let's get the third fight on, I think we'd have probably seen that fight last year.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, that whole situation's a bit strange, because towards the end of last year, they still seemed convinced, Wilder's team, and Shelley Finkel's part of that, and he's been around forever, that they definitely were contracted to get that third fight. And now that trail seems to have gone fairly cold, maybe because a clause has expired, and actually it's dodgy legal ground as to whether they are entitled to it or not, or maybe because they're just thinking, do we really want to go straight into a rematch with Tyson Fury? It's a very, historically, it's a very difficult thing to do, particularly when you've been knocked out. I mean, when Joshua took that rematch against Ruiz, I was doing some background for Sky on it, and you look back at how many fighters had won having been knocked out, having won an immediate rematch, having been knocked out. And you go back and you look at Floyd Patterson, he was one. But they're very few and far between. Lennox Lewis did it against Hasim Rahman. But there are very few examples, particularly in the heavyweight division. It's a really, really hard thing to do because there's so much mental scarring there. So, I wouldn't be surprised if it's gone quiet on that front, because they're thinking, actually, we don't really need to go straight back in with Tyson Fury, because if the same thing happens again, then it's kind of over. So maybe they just want to take their time a little bit more. But every time there was news on him, it wasn't good, was it? He was talking about the outfit. He was talking about Mark Breland. He was talking about the gloves. He persisted with the gloves for quite a long time. And it's just kind of, like I said, I do understand it from the fighter's point of view, but I guess it's the kind of curse of them. I was praising them earlier for just being authentic and being who they are, and not having kind of mouthpieces around them to mould their narrative too much. But there are certain situations in which, I suppose, it would be good if somebody just got a hold of him and just said, listen, this has got to stop now. Like, we can't have any more of this, because it's not doing you any favours. But then again, it's easier said than done. I wouldn't fancy the job particularly of telling Deontay Wilder what he's got to say and not say, because you could. It's up to him, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. I do feel for his trainer though, because in that position, a trainer is not just a boxing trainer. It's not just someone to show you where you're going wrong. Or when a fighter gets in the ring, that fighter's got a mentality that they're not going to be stopped regardless. And it's up to the trainer to look and think, this fight needs to stop, because my fighter's he's not going to quit, and he's going to get seriously hurt. And I think throwing the towel in round 6 was probably the best thing to do.
Yeah, it was. I haven't met anybody who doesn't think it was the right decision. Some people think he could have done it earlier, but it just seemed fairly clear that Jay Diaz wasn't going to do it. They've always had this co-trainer situation with Wilder, Jay Diaz and Mark Breland, and it's worked. It worked for however many fights and however many defences. It's quite an unusual setup. Generally speaking, things like that in any sport don't really work, or they have a shelf life. And I suppose this had a shelf life too, but it was long. And I just don't understand the criticism of Breland, because it was definitely the right thing to do. He was gone. He was completely gone, and he had been for a while. And it was just a case of, did they want to save him, or just stand there and watch him get really badly knocked out? Because there's no possible way that wasn't going to happen. That was definitely going to happen.
Yeah.
And Mark Breland saved him. And it's just strange to think that experienced boxing people can look at that and not think it was the right decision. I find that mind-boggling, to be honest.
Yeah. That leads us to the next question. There is a lot of rumours in the press at the moment that you probably know what I'm coming on to. AJ Fury 2021 is potentially virtually agreed. Do you think that fight will happen without fans?
No, I think it is definitely going to happen. And in the summer, May, June is what people are talking about. Eddie said the other day that June's more likely. I still think it will go to the Middle East. It will go somewhere where they can get some crowds in. Could mean it will be indoors, because it will be really, really hot there by that time of year. But what we know about having been there the year before last now, for the Ruiz rematch, is that there is no limit to what they can make happen in terms of accommodating things and building stadiums and making sure that everything everybody needs is there. That is not, for them, that is not a problem in any way, shape or form. Whatever it is that needs to be done to get that fight on there, if they decide they want it, it will happen. They'll get it done. So I think that's probably where it'll be. And yeah, I mean, there'll be what the capacity will be. I don't know. It was a bit strange last time because there were 15,000 there, but most of them, some did come over from the UK, but not many. They were mostly people who were in that kind of broad area. But I think there will be fans. I think there will be fans, which will be good for the promoters to get some kind of gate, because they've been going a long time without a gate now. But it'll be such a huge event. It'll be on all sorts of networks. The last I heard was that ESPN and DAZN in the USA would probably show it, and Sky and BT in the UK would probably show it, and people on both sides of the Atlantic would just make up their mind who they wanted to watch it with. So there'll be an enormous amount of revenue generated from it, as well as the site fee, which will be huge, you'd imagine. I don't know how much, but it'll be massive. It's just, yeah, I definitely think it will happen. Which is great to say, because often these things don't, do they? And that's one of the main criticisms of boxing some of the time, is that things that absolutely should happen don't happen.
When it does happen, what's the outcome?
So I think Fury's been boxing a lot longer than Joshua. And I think that really matters, because from the background he's from, he's a traveller, as everybody knows. And so he started boxing when he was about 4 or 5. I'm sort of slightly obsessed with this subject. I just find it really, really interesting. And that he's born into this kind of hothouse boxing culture where, it's comparable to football in Brazil, or sprinting in Jamaica, or distance running in East Africa. Like, people laugh at me a little bit when I make those comparisons sometimes. But it's the same thing, you're born in a place where there is an obsession with a particular sport. Everyone plays it as soon as they're old enough to stand up, and everyone's really competitive. That competitiveness breeds success, and it just perpetuates itself. And that's what you've got with boxing within the travelling community. It didn't used to be something that they would do as pros. It would be something they would, or not as serious pros, it'd be something that they would make a bit of extra cash doing as journeymen. But last 20 years, obviously, it's changed. And with Andy Lee, Billy Joe Saunders, Tyson Fury, all of these fighters, and there are loads coming through now, loads. And they're going to win titles and win world titles. So that's where Fury's from. So he's been boxing forever, for twice as long as Joshua has, quite simply, because Joshua started when he's been boxing for about 12 years. And it's amazing what he's achieved. Absolutely unbelievable. But for me, the difference between the two of them is that Fury's been doing it a lot longer than Joshua. He knows more than Joshua. He's more comfortable in any situation, basically, than Joshua. He's more comfortable in the ring than Joshua. I think Joshua is catching him quickly because he's an incredibly quick learner. But if I had to pick a winner, I would pick Fury, because for the reasons that I've just stated, I don't think there's really anything he can't do. We've seen him outbox people, and then we saw what he did against Wilder. I'm not ruling Joshua out, not by any stretch, but if I had to pick, I would pick Fury. But I wouldn't necessarily then pick Fury in the rematch, were Fury to win the first one. It would depend on the manner of the victory, were he to win. But say he won on points in the first fight, Joshua would learn so much from that, and being the kind of character he is, maybe he could close that gap and win the second fight. I love it. It's a great match, and two really good characters to get involved in it. So I think the build-up would be really, really interesting, because they definitely do respect each other. But I think the exchanges between them in the run-up to it could be pretty entertaining.
He's already started, isn't he, Fury? And to be fair, if you look, Joshua hasn't really bit. Joshua hasn't.
No, he hasn't. I mean, it's always interesting to see how people kind of play that one, because I remember with Joshua Klitschko, it's a different dynamic for this fight, but with Joshua Klitschko, there was a lot of respect there. They'd sparred. Klitschko was kind of, the kind of presidential figure within world boxing, having been champion for such a long time. I thought he was pretty patronising throughout the build up to that fight, Klitschko. And I thought if he was me, I would have found that really irritating if I was Joshua. And I think he did, but he kind of just didn't really go there, didn't really say too much. But I think with someone like Fury, at some point you're going to bite to an extent, because I think it's inevitable, and I don't think it's a bad thing. You know, when people go fishing on Twitter or whatever, and they're looking for someone to rile someone up a little bit, it's not a bad thing if somebody does allow themselves to get riled up, because that's the nature of it, isn't it? That's I like to see them fire back. I like to see them snap back. You don't want to be wasting too much of your time on it or investing too much energy in it. Fury likes to think that he's the master of the mind games and he'll be able to get inside Joshua's head, but I'm not too sure he'll bother spending that much time trying to do it. Maybe just the odd concerted, raiding mission, because I think Joshua's pretty solid mentally. People could go on as much as they like about the defeat against Ruiz because it happened, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure he's squared that away with himself now. But face to face at stuff. Well, I mean, that's another thing. Like, the build-up will be different, won't it? Because whenever it gets announced in the next few weeks, usually you'd have a big press conference. They probably have one in London. They probably have one in New York. They might have one somewhere else. Press tour. There won't be one.
No,
there won't be one. They won't see each other until fight week. So there'll be none of that. That psychological aspect will be taken out of the equation completely. Because even if they do a split screen Zoom or whatever, it's not the same, is it? You're not in the same room. You're not sizing each other up.
Imagine if they still have to do the bubble and they have to stay in the same hotel.
Well, it's so if it is in Saudi. So last time, basically, in Diriyah, where we were in a hotel. Sky, we were in a hotel just a couple hundred yards away, and then where the weigh-in was, on that bit of grass where the weigh-in was, that's in the middle of two hotels. Basically, there's a big tower behind the weigh-in stage, and then off to each side in a kind of like horseshoe shape, there's two hotels. And Joshua was in one on one side, and Ruiz was in one on the other side. And Matchroom and all the fighters were in these two hotels. I think basically everybody was in one of them, apart from Team Joshua, which was in the other one. So if they were to go back to the same place, I'd imagine that it would be a similar kind of setup. So they never really had to cross paths. But yeah, that would be. I mean, the bubbles that they've had so far. I remember Dillian White chose to bring his Winnebago down and stay in the car park within the bubble, but in there because he didn't want to be bumping into Povetkin, at the breakfast buffet. He just didn't want that. And I totally get that. I remember talking to Bellew about this and just said, how would you have got on in the bubble? And he said, I would have killed somebody in the bubble. It would have been a complete nightmare. He said, I couldn't have done it. I would have had to have done what Dillian did, or just paid for my own personal bubble for my own team somewhere else and all the testing, because I wouldn't have been able to do it. Yeah, I mean, there are so many aspects to it that make it unusual. I mean, we've had big fights during this period. I mean, Canelo's boxed during this period, obviously, but there's nothing bigger than this. Nothing bigger than this. And to do it with those kinds of restrictions, you never really know, do you, what kind of effect that might have on either one of them.
No, but I'm for sure. I'm looking forward to watching that. And you just mentioned another fighter. There's a few rumours circulating this morning that Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders is close to being agreed. Now, I think that's an unbelievable fight. I really do. I think it's clever by Eddie Hearn. He looks after Billy Joe. He's now got Canelo. Is it a two-match contract with Canelo?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
And he's give his promise, hopefully, to Billy Joe. So it'll be Yildirim and then Billy Joe. I'm not saying Billy Joe can do it, but if anybody can beat Canelo, it can be a fully fit Billy Joe.
Yeah, I would have agreed with that a couple of years ago. I just think that the inactivity and the fact that he hasn't really lived a life outside the ring for basically his whole career, I think that's going to have eroded his chances of beating Canelo just too much. I would never rule him out because, like Fury, he's the kind of fighter I would never back against with total confidence. Again, he's been boxing for a really long time, same background, and it shows. You know, he's so at home in the ring. He's so comfortable in there. You cannot panic him. You cannot. Nobody's been able to yet anyway. You cannot unsettle him. And he does have tremendous boxing skills. But I just think that if he boxed Canelo a couple of years ago, then I would have given him a real shot of winning. But now I don't really. I'm not saying he's got no chance, but I think Canelo's got a lot better. And I just don't think you can really do what Saunders has done over the since that Lemieux performance. I don't think you can really do what he's done, which is just have a handful of fights, none of which have really been very testing to take you up to the age of 30. I think he is now maybe a little bit older. I don't think you can do that and expect to stay on that razor sharp elite edge, which is where he'll need to be to beat Canelo. I think Canelo will stop him late on. It's an amazing bit of work by Eddie because you got it. I mean, he is brilliant at what he does. He really is, because
he's by far the best promoter out there.
Well, just on the international stage with DAZN is what I'm talking about mostly, because they had that massive contract with Canelo, which obviously was becoming a problem for financial reasons, I'd imagine. They were paying him so much money. They got out of that. At the time, people thought, oh, you know, that's a disaster. That shows that DAZN are on their way out. That was great for them because it meant that they could stop paying him all that money. And now they've got him back because he boxed Callum Smith, and Eddie's done this deal. So Eddie's managed to keep Canelo on DAZN, and DAZN are probably paying him half what they would have been before, which is, you know, talk about doing something that's going to endear yourself to one of your broadcast partners. I mean, that is like, you cannot do any better than that. And he's got another one of his guys, the biggest fight in one of the biggest fights in boxing. Canelo's probably is globally the biggest star in boxing, so that fighting him becomes a bit like fighting Mayweather used to be, in that you're going to make a lot of money. And it is really good to see him finally get the fight, Saunders, because it looked like it was going to happen last year, then obviously it didn't, and then it looked like it might happen last autumn or whatever, September, once we come out of lockdown. And he kind of ruled himself out of that, Billy Joe. And at that point, I just wondered, does he really want to do this anymore? Because if you don't want to fight Canelo, or if 12 weeks isn't long enough, you know, you haven't kept yourself in condition, then obviously, if 12 weeks isn't long enough, does he really want to do this anymore? But he does. He obviously does. And it'd be brilliant if he could prove me wrong, because the skills are tremendous. But yeah, for the reasons I gave, I don't see it.
Yeah. And on to our last subject, the lightweight division. That division is something else. You've got Tank, you've got Lopez, you've got Lomachenko, you've got Linares, you've got Campbell, you've got
Haney, Garcia.
The list is just endless. Have you ever known a division so good at one stage?
In recent times, it is a really good one, because a lot of them are young. And what's been interesting since Lopez beat Lomachenko is that people are talking about these new four kings. And they're talking about Lopez, Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, and Devin Haney. Vasily Lomachenko just seems to have disappeared. Like, people just seem to have pushed him to one side, which is a bit ridiculous, to be honest, because I still think that he would beat Haney, and I think he would beat Garcia, and he might beat Lopez in a rematch. Who knows? Davis as well.
Did you watch Lomachenko?
Yeah, I watched it, yeah.
What was your thoughts?
Well, Lopez. I thought Lopez was great. When you have a fight where there's a heavy favourite, then if they lose, what often happens is people spend all their time trying to work out what Lomachenko didn't do and why he lost. How did he inflict this defeat on himself? And they don't give enough credit to the person who actually won. And people were talking endlessly about, why didn't he get going until the second half of the fight? He didn't throw any punches in the first half of the fight. The second half of the fight, like, he won the last 4 rounds. Why didn't he just do that from the beginning? And what that completely fails to understand is that there's an opponent in there whose job it is not to let you do what you want to do. And Lopez didn't allow him to do that. He was wary of the size and the power, maybe, and it was just a very, very solid game plan. I thought it was easy to score. I thought he won the first 8 rounds, Lopez. From memory, I think that's how I had it. Lomachenko won the last 4. And it was a sort of really, really pretty clean 116, 112. I didn't see Andre Ward's draw, as in that wasn't what I saw when I watched it. That's 2 more rounds he's got to find for Lomachenko in there. That wasn't what I got. But it'd be interesting to see what happens with Lomachenko now, because that can't be it. Surely that can't be it. You know, everybody was talking about him being one of the best boxers of all time, and then he loses to Lopez, and they just shuffle him to one side. But it is a really good division, because those other guys are all young as well. That's what gives people the kind of buzz, I think, is that if they stay at the same weight, and they won't all stay the same weight, but for long enough, then they can get a bit of a round robin going almost. And then if they all move up, they might all, I'd have thought they probably all will at some point move up to super lightweight, apart from maybe Davis. It's just a really, really good mix. I mean, the welterweight division has been a really good mix for a while, with Crawford and Spence and Porter and Garcia and Thurman, Pacquiao, but they just haven't boxed each other, have they? That's the problem. That's the problem. And if these lot do, then it will turn out to be it'll turn out to be special. But I do worry about it a bit, because Garcia, when he beat Campbell, which was really impressive, he then came straight out and said, right, I want to fight Gervonta Davis. Brilliant. He should really be fighting Devin Haney, because Haney's the WBC champion, and that was for an interim title. But now it seems like there's rumours that he's going to fight Manny Pacquiao in some kind of exhibition. I mean, what is the point of that? It's just so ridiculous to waste time on that. I mean, you can't have 2 fighters like that fighting an exhibition. I mean, when I saw that, I just thought, oh, surely not. You know, it looked nailed on that Garcia would fight Devin Haney or Gervonta Davis, which either one would have been great. We cannot have him fighting Manny Pacquiao.
What probably don't help is the fact that they're all on different broadcasts. They're all signed to different promotions, aren't they? And so
that definitely doesn't help. I mean, with Haney and Garcia, it should be easy, because they're both with DAZN, different promoters, but that shouldn't really be a problem. Lopez is Top Rank, so ESPN, but Bob Arum's forever saying that cross-promotional fights are not as hard to make as people think they are. People just make them unnecessarily difficult. Gervonta Davis, again, he's with Heyman, isn't he? So that it does make it tricky. But if there is a will, then there is a way. I mean, you look at this constant back and forth between Crawford and Spence and Arum getting involved, and you never really hear anything from Heyman. So Spence is really sort of the only voice in that from his side. But they're just all blaming each other all the time. And the latest is Arum saying that Crawford's up for it, he's up for it, but Spencer's always going on about percentages and splits and all of this. And you just look at that situation, and it's hard to see it, isn't it? It's hard to see that happening. And I don't really know. It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. A bit like that Joshua Wilder, that made no sense to me either, why that didn't happen. The first round of negotiations not working out, you kind of think is inevitable, because everyone's just posturing. And then you just think after that they might get it done. But if you've got and I don't know what happened there, but if you've got a side who just won't give any ground, then it's not going to happen. It's just, it's not going to happen. And it's still the case that there are only a very small amount of people who actually know what's going on the inside of these deals. People think they do now, because promoters and whatever are happy to put stuff out on social media. But it's a bit of a fallacy to think that just because there's a lot more info out there that actually you know everything. You still know what they're happy for you to know. And there'll still be loads of things that you don't. So you just get a situation where everybody blames everybody else. And we just kind of suffer it as boxing fans that some fights that really need to happen just aren't going to.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like we was mentioning earlier, Deontay Wilder goes on some kind of spree where he brings out all these excuses, and then all of a sudden drops out that he actually was offered the Joshua fight and he turned it down because... And so when everyone's thinking it was Joshua who was backing out, it clearly shows that Joshua had done all he can to fight him.
Yeah, and it must be really frustrating when mud's getting slung around as to who's got in the way and who's been the problem and who's made sure that a fight hasn't happened. It must be really, really frustrating, because if you're on the inside of it, you will know. And I think after a while, he just thought, there's no point me talking about this anymore because no one ever seems to really believe me. But then eventually something comes out that proves that what he was saying was basically true, that he did win the fight and that it wasn't him, and that it was them. And I think that aspect of it, if you're a fighter, must be pretty tedious. You know, as much as they like to say, I don't worry about that, I just let my team deal with that. That can't really be true, because you're the one who actually has got to go in there and do it. So you're obviously going to have an input, and he definitely has a big input. You know, he's got his own promotional company. Yeah. He drives his own career. He's always been that way. So, I mean, that must be pretty frustrating. And when you think about it, Joshua became IBF champion in, what was it, April 2016? Yeah, that sounds right. And Wilder was already WBC champion by then, and he remained so for the next until February this year. So they were both champions for a really long time, and for a good stretch had all 4 belts between them, and they never managed to get that fight made. And it's terrible, really, when you look at it.
Yeah, no, 100%. But just before we let you go, Andy, give us your funniest moment. Like, what are your funniest stories in boxing?
Oof. That's a good one. I don't know. I need to have a bit of a think about that, to be honest. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen. For me, it's kind of little things. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, I know a lot of the time people like to have this kind of like set piece story that they'll come out with, and you know, and it's long and complicated and detailed and almost inevitably embellished. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, it's little things that really make me laugh. And I just remember going to Monaco so late 2019, and for the Matchroom show there, which is always, you know, it's great fun going over. It's an odd environment, and you wouldn't want to watch boxing in that. Well, we're watching boxing in those conditions now, basically. But it's an extraordinary place. And then all of a sudden you get this travelling boxing circus, which is just transplanted into the middle of the Monte Carlo casino, which is like something out of a James Bond film. I mean, it really is. The whole place is. And then you've got all of us lot turn up, and you're kind of wearing black tie, but no one's really sure what the dress code is and all the rest of it. And somebody who's at every single Matchroom show, and people all know him who follow boxing, is Mike Goodall, because he puts up all the rings. So he goes everywhere, absolutely everywhere. His company do it all, and he's great fun, Mike. He's a really, really entertaining guy. Loads of good stories. If you didn't really know him the first time that you met him, or if you spent a bit of time around him, you think that he was, you know, just think, wow, who is this guy? Because he can be pretty abrupt. One thing he takes enormous care over is his canvas. Like he'll get the canvas on the ring, stretched out perfectly, put all the transfers on it, all the advertising logos, all of that, pristine. So he did that in Monaco, and then he went away. And as he was away, they got all these dancing girls into the ring to do a rehearsal. And me and Darren Barker are watching this, and they just scuffed up his canvas completely. And Barker just turned to me and just said, Goodall is going to go absolutely mental when he comes back and sees this. And there's no one there. It was just us. And he came back, and he practically had a heart attack. Like he was running around the place, just screaming at everybody. This French choreographer who was there with this dance troupe, she just didn't know what was happening, and these girls as well, and he was just going mental. And Barker just couldn't help but wind him up and just go, Mike, like I think, mate, so what's happened there, Mike? Like this is just, I mean, that's not the normal kind of canvas you provide. And he just turned around and go, not now, Darren. But he was just completely losing it. Anyway, it's one of those ones where you kind of had to be there. But those are the things I like, you know, just those little kind of nuggets behind the scenes.
But that's why these interviews are perfect, because the viewers get to listen to stories like that, which are unreal, and also as well. I probably should have mentioned it, and I am going to mention it. As this is for Steffi Bull Promotions, give us what's your thoughts on a girl called Terry Harper?
Yeah, so I remember I commentated on her fight on the Brooks Zarafa undercard, and that was the first time we'd seen her on Sky, and the circumstances around that were interesting because I knew about her and I'd spoken to Steffi about her, and I think she was going to be on Facebook. So I'd done my prep and done my research, had a quick chat with her, mainly talked to Steffi because Terry's like perfectly happy to talk, but she doesn't say a lot. And catching somebody at the weigh is never the best time anyway, because they're stressed about making weight. And then of course that was a show where we were supposed to have Avanesian against Kelly, and it fell out the night before the fight. So we had to have a bit of a TV rejig. So she moved from being on Facebook to opening the TV coverage. And I think they might have kicked her up from 6 rounds to 8 as well. So that's a big, big change. And a lot of people would be a bit nervous about that. And they might be kind of like, oh, I don't know, can I do 2 extra rounds? But she was bang up for it. Like, she couldn't believe it when she was told. And so that was the first time we saw her. And you could tell that there was some real ability there. And a good story with her being from this like small village, same place as Steffi's from, and just the way she kind of drifted away from boxing and then came back into boxing. And it's just been great kind of watching her do her thing, because she's been entertaining every time. Last year was a real interesting year for her. I mean, I was doing something for a couple of podcasts, and they were asking me for who was my British Fighter of the Year, and I said, and I picked her because she had 3 world title fights. Nobody else did. No other British fighter had 3 world title fights. I kind of took Fury out of the equation and said Fury doesn't really count, because I would class him as my kind of like international fighter of the year, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it was her. She was the one I picked, and it was a really good win when she beat Eva Wahlström. And then the fight against Jonas was amazing. And it was really close. I thought Jonas just nicked it. But if I think one fighter just nicks it, I'm never going to be upset if the other one just nicks it or you get a draw. That's how that works. You can't, it's mad when you see people saying, oh, I had it 6 rounds to 4 in favour of one fighter, which is 1 round away from it being a draw. And they go mental because that's not what the result says. It was close.
Yeah.
And then a fairly routine performance towards the end of the year. But I just really want to see Matchroom have signed Hyun-Mi Choi now, haven't they? So that fight makes sense, the unification. And then you've got Michaela Mayer, who's got a lot to say, which I'm all for that. Like I said earlier on, I'm all for that. She's banging her own drum, and good luck to her. But I would love to see that because it's been brewing for a while now. It'd just be really interesting to see what she could go on and do, because she's still so young. She's got loads of time. She's got loads of time left. Another fighter I'm interested in seeing what they'll do next year too is Anthony Tomlinson, because we've covered him a couple of times. I think on Facebook, on another one of Steffi's fighters, and he's like, there are definite possibilities with him, because he's one of those unusual fighters who's just unnaturally heavy-handed. Like even when he throws, even when he's off balance, he seems to do some damage. So me and Matt think like we've done a few of his fights, and we both said to each other afterwards, like, there's he's a bit clumsy, and he's there's still a lot of room for improvement, but there's some sort of good raw ingredients there. And the kind of way he wears that mask to the ring and then takes it off, and he's got a good backstory and that kind of thing. Yeah, just can't wait for things to get back.
And Anthony's not with Steffi anymore.
Oh, is he not?
No. He's. I think he's gone with his amateur coach from Sheffield. I think it's just down to because of like the virus situation. I think we've been travelling.
Well, back, I guess, when training can resume. I didn't know that.
It was amicable. Like they're still best of pals, which is superb. And you've also got, I think it's going to be an absolute storming fight in February. League Appleyard versus Dalton Smith. I think that's going to be a great fight.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good matchup. That's a good matchup between two fighters who presumably know each other well. I don't know if they've sparred, but they may well have done because geographically they're close. Appleyard's been waiting for an opportunity for a while. I covered him a few times earlier in his career against Sean Dodd, against Atif Shafiq, and you just wondered whether lightweight was just a bit too much of a stretch for him and whether super lightweight will suit him better. But Dalton Smith's certainly someone you would pick out as being one of the kind of top prospects in the country, really. I remember seeing him box first at the World Series boxing finals in 2016 in Uzbekistan, and he was up, and it was his first time in that competition. He was only just a senior, and he was in with he was at super lightweight, so he was in with Lasniel Toledo, who was this like pretty supersonic Cuban, and he gave him a really good fight. It was close, like he didn't get it, but it was close. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, like that's impressive, because that's 5 rounds, first time he'd ever done 5 rounds against a top level Cuban. I remember just thinking to myself, remember the name because we'll be seeing plenty more of him. And interesting too that he decided to turn pro, because they redrew the weight divisions in amateur boxing, which meant that he went from being 64 to being 63. And making 64 kilos was already quite hard for him. So when they did that, he just thought, no, I can't, this is impossible now. So that kind of made the decision for him. And actually, I think it's I think that's turned out to be a good decision. He's going well. Yeah, no,
I look forward to it. But Andy, thank you very much for giving us some of your time. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But no, I've actually really enjoyed it. And we'd love to get you on again. Hopefully, once the big fights are finished this year, and say December time, we could get to speak about an amazing year. Everyone's well. The virus has gone, and boxing's back in its top place.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Andy, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.